How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Daily Counter News broadcast or podcast. Uh, Today, we don't really have any pictures to show you during the show, but what we are going to talk about is the financial corruption that exists in South Carolina. And I'm going to give you guys a bunch of numbers and tell you where you can find these numbers to do your own research on it. But before we start, you guys have the option of calling into the show and discussing these matters with us. The phone number you can call is 803-497-8124. Now, that phone number is dedicated to the show. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So even if you have a news tip or whatever, you can call that number and we'll start looking into things. But today, we're working on a couple of articles pertaining to the financial corruption that exists in South Carolina. And the best way to do something like this is to look at the state budget and see where the numbers are, go back in the past budgets and stuff like this. So this also ties into, this first section ties into family courts in South Carolina. For a lot of people that have never experienced family courts in any state, let alone South Carolina, you believe that these courts are there to aid families, not just divorce and stuff like this. But in actuality, they are part of the corruption system that's in South Carolina. There is no such thing as a family court in South Carolina. These courts are called domestic relations court, and they are property courts. Their sole purpose is to divide properties. That's their only and sole purpose in documentation on the books. So let's go in and start looking at some of these numbers. And this is what we're doing right now as an investigative story for this. If you are in family court, usually one party is going to be ordered to pay child support when there are children involved. And this is now called the Child Support Enforcement Agency. This is a federal agency that is divided among the states, and states are kind of handling that. It goes through social services. Even if your case was a private case between two individuals, your payment actually goes through social services now. This was a big change. The federal government made every state do this. South Carolina was one of the last states to actually get this process done. So when we talk budgets, we're talking about final numbers here, because in the story, in the article we were working on, you're actually going to be able to bring up all the numbers and everything and look at them. But the Child Support Enforcement Agency for South Carolina received $79 million. And these numbers come from the 25-26 year budget. So we're talking this year up to next year's budget. So these individuals, and this is all inclusive, are getting $79 million to operate, to collect money from parents, and to disperse it. Now, that's a pretty high number, but when you look at another portion of the budget in the same section, it's called Family Preservation Organization. Now, this is a group that is designed for the state to preserve the family bond, preserve the family unit. There are all sorts of programs that they can offer you, and I do use the term offer. They're only receiving $9 million. So, $9 million to keep families together, to help families stay together, compared to $79 million to collect money. And then we go further down and we go into the Department of Child Advocacy. The administration for the Department of Child Advocacy receives $873,000 for this budget year. Now, this is just the administration portion. Now, in the past, we've done a few articles pertaining to budget and for the state of South Carolina, and we came across a number that was listed for guardian ad litems. Now, these are individuals that are employed by the court when the court feels necessary. They're supposed to be the court's eyes and ears to safeguard the well-being of a child. You have attorney guardians, and then you have what they call lay guardians, which are private individuals who take an 8-hour course, and then they're put on a case. And their main duty is to observe, speak with the child, tell the court, hey, the child's bonded to this parent, there's no abuse, stuff like this, which is the same thing that social services does in their cases. And when we first came across this number several years ago, this number was attached to the judicial department of the budget, and it was $4 million. So, like most incurative journalists, we filled out a FOIA. We wanted to know who was drawing on this account, as it's commonly known that guardian ad litems are paid by the parents involved in these cases. Both parents have to usually pay equal amounts to this guardian ad litem for their services. So we were kind of shocked to see that the state was reserving $4 million for these individuals. Now, the state doesn't reimburse these individuals. These individuals, if not paid by parent A or parent B, have to go after the parent. So when we didn't get an answer back within 30 days, we contacted the department and spoke to a young lady there who was actually the head of this department who handles this section of the budget, and she had no clue as to what we were talking about. So we pointed her towards the budget while we were on the phone, presented it to her, showed her, and she was kind of shocked to see this number, and she said she's never heard of this account, but she would look into it. So 3 weeks went by, and we still hadn't heard anything, and we reached out again wanting to speak to this young lady. Come to find out that she no longer worked there, which immediately, as a journalist, raised our antennas a little bit. So as it went on the following year, we noticed that the account was no longer in the judicial. We thought, like, okay, maybe they closed it down. We found it later on in the Department of Social Services section of the budget, and it had doubled to $8 million. Again, filed FOIA, asked who's drawing on this account. Again, no answer. We reached out to a couple of legislators that we were in contact with, asked them about it. They had no clue about this section of the budget. So this year, when we looked at the budget and we noticed this number, still in the Department of Social Services section, it is now $8,548,000. Okay, let me read that number again because I'm only working on one cup of coffee so far, folks. $8.5 million. Let me put it that way. $8.5 million is set aside in the state budget for guardian ad litems. Guardian ad litems come under a lot of heat in the public eye and in the private sector pertaining to their qualifications, what their actual jobs are. Lots of times guardians do a very below par job for protecting a child's interest. It's mostly all opinionated, which by law they are prohibited from recommending custody to one parent or another parent. But in the majority of the guardian ad litem reports that we've been handed and we've read, there is still that opinion in those words. This particular number can be found on page 115 of the 2025-26 budget for South Carolina. So look it up, verify the numbers, look at the whole budget in that section, and kind of ask yourself, where is this money going? Who's drawing on this money? Now, in this same section, family courts, when it comes to the budget itself, family courts are being allocated $19 million for the family courts. And this is on page 159 and 160. Now, when we did this budget analysis a few years back, it averaged out to where the family court judges were being paid a lot more than the South Carolina State Supreme Court Justice. The head of the state judiciary in the legal robe was being paid less than a family court judge. And it seems to have continued this escalade. Um, One of the reasons the Daily County News covers family court stories is not from a he said, she said aspect. We cover it from the violations of human rights in family courts throughout South Carolina, throughout the United States, throughout the world, matter of fact. Uh, because this is a court where your rights, your constitutionally protected rights, do not exist. A lot of people call it a kangaroo court. Most states do not actually have any legal doctrine to create a family court, but yet they exist. These judges are also considered to be the most powerful because they have what's called a immunity. While they're doing their job as a judge, they are immune from wrongful prosecution, which means if they knowingly are siding with one parent over another parent and they know they're doing the wrong thing, they cannot be held accountable. There are a lot of aspects of family courts that the average individual does not comprehend. Judges, in many cases, unfortunately, are not educated to understand what the best interest of a child truly is, parental alienation, domestic violence. These are things that judges are not educated on. Every judge and lawyer in the state of South Carolina has to attend what they call a CLE, Continued Learning Education course, every year. These are kind of lunches. They go sit in a room for a few hours and they discuss cases. But they're not educated on psychology of a domestic violence victim, on the psychology of parental alienation. They're not taught what signs to look for in the legal documentations that might raise a red flag pertaining to the best interest of a child. So it's the reason we started covering family courts. And in the time, one of the first stories we ran, actually, was a case out of Florida. And due to the article we ran, the judge in the case happened got wind of it because I believe his secretary read the article and told him. And he read the article and he discovered that what one of the attorneys was presenting to him was not factual. So he immediately reversed custody and gave the mom custody where the child is thriving. And this happens in a lot of cases that people just don't phantom how serious these things are. You know, in family courts, you're not permitted a court-appointed lawyer if you can't afford one. You know, this is a constitutional protected right that does not exist in family courts. So let's get back to the numbers. When you look at numbers, which a lot of people don't like numbers crunching, but as a journalist, you have to kind of get used to this. It's follow the money adage, basically. So we have a child support enforcement agency that's earning nearly $80,000 a year. You have Family Preservations, a group that's supposed to keep families together, only getting $9 million. You have the Child Advocacy Group getting nearly $1 million. You have GALs who's getting $8.5 million. And then you have the family court judges getting $19 million. So the numbers don't match up. South Carolina actually has a philosophy that you can find in legal doctrine and stuff to do everything to keep a family together if at all possible, excluding abuse and neglect cases, okay? So if they're showing abuse, actual physical, emotional, mental abuse, then they're not required to hold families together. It's also one of the reasons why in a lot of states, in South Carolina especially, that the argument of physical abuse rises in these domestic relations courts. It's also one of the reasons why a lot of these cases never go to a criminal aspect. Because once they go to a criminal aspect, then the family courts kind of lose a little bit of jurisdiction there, which means they lose money, and now it's a whole different ballgame. It's also theorized that a lot of these cases don't go to a criminal case because the judges and the lawyers know that there is no actual abuse. That this is the easiest way to get a divorce in South Carolina, because in South Carolina, and this is another thing a lot of people don't realize, is that you only have 5 reasons you can get divorced in South Carolina: adultery, 1 year separation, habitual drug usage, physical abuse, and then drugs, uh, and alcohol. These are the only 5 reasons you can actually get a divorce in South Carolina. Now, society has moved forward in a lot of these aspects, redefining what classifies as these cases. Um, but South Carolina seems to be one of the many states in the southeastern portion of the United States that maintains a very loose understanding of these. Um, Family courts, on average, bring $60 billion a year in to the states. So why stop a money train? It's one of the reasons why we started getting into family court issues and cases, because there is so much misinformation, so much misunderstanding, so much. We don't want to use the word corruption, but it does exist in these courts, and it's easy to exist in these courts. You have judges who are elected by legislators who are attorneys, that if these legislators come in front of these judges that they just put in there and they don't side with that particular lawyer, they may not be a judge next year. Uh, you don't bite the hand that feeds you routine. So these are things that we looked at when we started doing family courts, because mainstream media, mainstream news does not do this unless it's a high profile case like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie. The average person does not get to have their story told in mainstream media when it comes to these sort of subject matters. So it becomes very important, because when children are involved in these cases, they are the future of our country, of our state, of everything. And when you look at the definition of best interest of a child, it's very loosely written. Here at the Daily Counter News, we do believe in 50-50 shared parenting, that a child has the right to both parents individually, uh, absent neglect and abuse, the common sense stuff. The old saying of "it takes a village to raise a child" is more true today than it was 200 years ago. Uh, but this is money that is coming out of your taxes, out of your pockets, going to these groups, going to these individuals for services that are not being met. Uh, we are actually contacting every one of these agencies that we just spoke of, asking them to clarify that amount for their departments. We're hoping to hear something back, but majority of the times we don't, because nobody wants to put their feather in the hat. It's why domestic violence in South Carolina is so high as well, because there's money to be made. When there's money to be made, usual legislators will find some way to get into it. South Carolina is considered one of the most corrupt states, but hopefully, with the influx of new legislators, new moral legislators, we will be seeing a change in that. We are not seeing the attorney wanting to become a legislator that much anymore, as we are private individuals, private citizens who feel that they need to make a change for their state, for their county, for their district, wherever you live in South Carolina. We encourage these individuals to do this, to put their foot out there and say, hey, it's time we need to change. We have children that are growing up hungry. We have children who are losing parents. We can't, as a society, not just a state, but as a society, cannot allow this. And a good portion of this money could probably go to benefiting children who are needing this for educational programs and so forth. So, as you know, not to play on the card here, but as Elon Musk is going through the federal government, question arises: do we need somebody in that same position to go through the state of South Carolina to see where the misspending is happening, where our money is actually going, and is actually being used properly? Uh, so again, we want your guys' opinion on now next Sunday, and I'm going to interject this here. Next Sunday, we're not going to be doing any sort of storytelling or anything. We're going to get on the air at 4 o'clock every Sunday, and hopefully, we will have listeners calling into the show. We want to hear from you guys. We want to hear the stories you guys want run. We want to hear your opinions on the articles that we've written. We want to hear your thoughts on the information we give out. The Daily Counter News is your news, your opinion. We, under no circumstances, ever force some opinion on an individual. That's not what the news is for. Our job as journalists for the Daily Counter News is to inform. What you do with that information is your prerogative. It's your opinion. So we will give you the facts of every aspect of everything. There are certain things that we can't put in a written article, which with the Daily Counter podcast, we now have that option of giving you the rest of the story, as it used to be called, for those of you that were around during the 80s. But we can give you the information that we weren't able to put into an article. It goes back to one of the first articles we started covering in the family course was the Ashley Kidwell story. There was so much information in there that we could not put into an article and have the article become poignant to the subject matter. Most people would not believe that a mother of two young children who has endured chaos her entire life, trauma her entire life, could turn it around, but due to a toxic parent, lose everything, including a new love relationship that was encouraging her, that was benefiting her and her children. This is stuff of Hollywood, but sadly it is also the stuff of reality. Just sitting here looking at these numbers that I've given you in the show, I'm still very saddened and flabbergasted that these departments are getting this sort of money for destroying children, for destroying parents, the relationship, mentally, physically. We know several parents who live out of their car, who live out of a tent, because they can't afford the child support that's being ordered upon them for financial purposes, not for the best interests of a child, but for strictly financial purposes. One of the most recent stories we did was Armoni Pincus, a family court judge at large in South Carolina, and it seems to be our most popular video so far. And they've always been our most popular articles because the information we put out there, the factual information we put out there on these judges. It's always a moment of pride when we can do that for families, for children, and educate individuals. Family courts are not an easy court. There are good judges and bad judges. One of the most notable judges that we were exposed to was Judge Dana Morris out of Kershaw County, who we've been told by multiple people has always been a fair judge, an honest judge, a caring judge. Sadly, he retired several years ago, but he seems to be the exception to the rule in Kershaw County. Another article we're working on is pro se litigants. Now, pro se litigants are individuals in these courts that cannot afford an attorney, that don't get one appointed to them, so they have to represent themselves. And there's always that old adage for lawyers and people like that, is if you're representing yourself, you're representing a fool. But here we're taking people that have no concept of the legal laws, the procedures, and everything, and we're forcing them to advocate for their children, for their rights, with no knowledge of how the system works. So that's another story we're working on. Uh, we're going to play with that one a little bit because we're going to bring in some aspects from Ashley Kidwell's story to hopefully shed some light on that one as well and to show how the system actually breaks down when it comes to that, because these pro se litigants are basically ignored in these family court cases, and lawyers will lovely give you a lip service as the term's used, but when they get to court, what they promised isn't there. Uh, Again, a lot of parents we've spoken to in the state of South Carolina have stated that they'd rather represent themselves than actually go to a family court lawyer. Some for financial reasons, some for issues of trust. A lot of people do not trust family court lawyers. But that doesn't mean there aren't good lawyers out there that truly do care in the state of South Carolina. So we are hoping that next Sunday at 4 o'clock, you will join us to actually discuss some of these subject matters, get your opinions. I mean, this show is pretty much open to anybody. We do not edit anything out. The number you can call is 803-497-8124. We're actually going to write it in the description and on the Daily Counter News. We're going to put it out there. Feel free to call it. Please join us next Sunday for the next show. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to be starting at 4 o'clock. And we're going to stay on until 5. Even if it means I have to sit here and talk all the time. Which I'm good at. Not as much as I'm good at writing, but we can discuss certain subject matters, movies, music, if that's what it comes down to. So we're going to end the show because it's 27 minutes into the show already. And lately we've been keeping them down to 30 minutes or so. So join us next Sunday. Read the articles that are getting ready to come out on the state budget and the numbers that we gave you. Look them up for yourself. Educate yourself is one of the biggest keys to changing things. And as a journalist, one of our purposes is to educate individuals on matters that they may not be aware of that's going on in South Carolina and so forth. So we hope you guys join us next Sunday. We hope you guys share this video, subscribe to the video so you know when we do go live. Please be safe.